Now that we have the motor mounted in our 55 Thunderbird, it was time to start plumbing the fuel and exhaust systems. For fuel, we chose TechAFX, which is a relatively new AN hose system, and we invited Will Hansel to tell us what makes TechAFX special.
Well, this is all that TechAFX sells, and the reason is because today's fuel has really changed. It's much more caustic than it's ever been. It's the ethanol and a bunch of other chemicals that they put in it for combustion. And so we sell, I got a sample here. We sell Teflon hose, but we sell only conductive core, and no matter what your customers are buying, what company they're buying from, they need to buy hose that's black on the inside. And that's intended so that the static electricity that's generated by fuel passing through Teflon, which is its one negative, is grounded to the vehicle via the fittings. Poly tetrafluoroethylene is Teflon, basically. Okay, that's the brand name, so that's the Kleenex version of PTFE. They actually impregnate carbon into the Teflon while they're making it. And carbon's basically, you know, rusted metal would be the easiest way to explain it. And the carbon is conductive. And so then when you put the fitting, you know, onto the hose and it's sitting on each other, even though this is anodized and this is carbon, it will transmit the static electricity to the fitting, which then goes to the vehicle.
Okay.
And so all of our hose is black on the inside. We also sell some inventive things like this. We call it our QD jumper. So in your case on the Thunderbird, you guys have a fuel rail on the Coyote that you need to hook up to. This is an OE stainless steel connection. It's got stainless steel insert with a Viton seal. Snap that on, and on the other end, you put one of our AN fittings, and now you're into an AN hose business.
When assembling a TechAFX hose, the first thing you do is you find a rough length and you cut it off. There's a bunch of ways you can do this. We chose to use a power air saw. Then once you've got that done, you take and slide your nut over the black wrap in the hose, past the point where your end is going to be. Then you measure back 7/16 of an inch and take a hose cutter and score the black wrap, and then take a utility knife and cut the black wrap. All right, after you've cut the black wrap off, you can insert the olive in between the Teflon and the stainless braid, and then you push your fitting on and you bring the nut back down and tighten the whole assembly up. The new Coyote motor we're using has the fuel rail on the driver's side. So we chose to run the fuel lines similarly to what Ford would have done, but on the driver's side. The other challenge was finding a good place to put the fuel filter, since the original filter was mounted inside the carburetor. We used a 90s GM pickup truck filter, which has the correct thread for a 3/8 flare fitting. We chose to mount the filter right above the wheel arch up against the frame so that it was clear of any travel of the axle and the shocks, and Nick had plenty of room to run the exhaust around it. The most challenging place to run both lines was getting over the frame, right where the frame arches up for the rear axle. There's only really room for the original 3/8 line, but I was able to bend the lines and keep them as close together as possible and maintain a rattle-free installation. The Coyote motor uses a pulse width modulated fuel system in the stock Mustang. In an aftermarket custom car application, you have to use a vacuum referenced aeromotive style fuel pressure regulator. We chose to mount the regulator right below the hydro boost on the driver's inner fender. On fuel injected cars, we like to use in-tank fuel pump kit because the intake fuel pump kit comes with a sump that precludes you from starving from fuel when you're accelerating hard or going around a corner when you're starting to get low on gas in the tank. The tank that we used here is actually a Camaro tank, but we use the same process on our Thunderbird. You simply cut a hole in the tank to the correct dimension in the location you want your pump to be in. And if your tank has any ribs, you take a hammer and dolly and flatten them out so that the tank's kit can actually seal to the tank and not have a fuel leak. Once you've got your hole in the tank and your ribs flattened, you measure the depth of your tank, and you use their universal bracket and you mount the sump to it. Since the sump is only held on with one screw, we like to weld it as well just to make sure that it never comes off. After that, you install the pump itself onto the bracket and the sump, and then you fixture it to the tank and mark your holes to drill. Once you've drilled all the holes, you put the special bracket inside the tank and your gasket and some aviation Permatex sealant, and you screw the whole thing together for a leak-free seal. When it came to doing exhaust on our Thunderbird, we had some unique challenges because MagnaFlow doesn't actually make a kit for a 55 Thunderbird, and even if they did, they don't make a kit for a 55 Thunderbird with a 5.0 Coyote motor. So what we did is we got one of their universal 2.5-inch mandrel bent builder's kits and a bunch of extra J-bends and straight sections of tube so that we could make our own exhaust system. Part of the problem with why the Thunderbird doesn't have a custom fit kit yet is because it's convertible, it has a X member in the frame, which makes it difficult to run pipes and nearly impossible to run an X pipe. So we decided to forego the X pipe, and Nick took the universal kit and carefully laid out his exhaust system in the car, cutting his J-bends and TIG welding the entire system together so that it fit within the original passages for the exhaust in the Thunderbird and made it up to the factory Mustang headers that came on our 5.0 engine. Because we had to custom make the exhaust system for the car, one of the things you always got to watch out for is the routing of your pipes around moving parts such as the springs and the shocks, and on an independent suspension car where the control arms may end up. The other thing you got to remember is where your fuel system is, because you don't want to get your pipes too close to the fuel lines and make them hot, which could cause vapor lock, or if there's a leak, you have a potential for a fire. The tailpipes we left along on the car, like we usually do, so that when the car's done and sitting on the ground at proper ride height, we can address how we want them to look coming out of the back of the car. Now that the fuel and exhaust systems have been installed in the Thunderbird, we're getting closer to being able to start this car and hear it run.